Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith. As you guys know, several weeks ago we talked about Sony's new A1, and at that time I kind of gave you guys just sort of like a general overview of the camera. I've also kind of made a video to talk about what it's like shooting with the camera. I kind of shared you guys a little bit of behind the scenes from one of my latest shoots, but there are some other things I've discovered about this camera, just different little feature changes and setting changes that I thought were significant. And these are not necessarily things that I've heard a lot of people talk about, so I thought I would go ahead and mention some of these things. Stay tuned and we'll jump right into this. Okay, so probably one of the first things I noticed, and this is actually not new to the A1, this is something that I did see on the Sony a7S III first, and I've also seen it on the FX3. That is the fact that this camera has a true sensor cleaning mechanism. Now, sensor cleaning mechanisms are not new. Cameras have had this for quite some time, where they have a little bit of an ultrasonic pulse that's applied to the cover glass over the sensor, and that kind of helps remove dust. But for whatever reason, early Sony cameras, even before this one, even as recent as the A9 Mark II and the A7R4, those cameras don't have a true sensor cleaning mechanism. They don't have that ultrasonic vibration of the low pass filter. Instead, the camera uses the IBIS mechanism to kind of shake the sensor around, and it's pretty terrible. It does not work. But anyways, on the A1, it does have a true ultrasonic sensor cleaning mechanism. So that's something that I thought was kind of interesting. Another thing that I noticed is that people used to ask me a lot about their exposure simulation. People would say, Jeremy, you know, I love Mirrorless. I love how we have this exposure simulation to help us judge our exposures. But every time I put my flash on the camera, or every time I put my flash trigger on the camera, that exposure simulation goes away. And this was very, very annoying for a lot of people. Some folks still said, hey, you know, I want to be able to still see my ambient exposure even whenever I am dealing with flash. Now, the reason why Sony did this is because, you know, normally if you're shooting in a studio or something like that and you're at like f8 or f11 and you're in a dimly lit studio, then you would just get a black frame and you wouldn't be able to see anything. But outdoors, it is very, very nice to still be able to have the ability to turn on the exposure simulation even when you're using flash, because it's very useful in helping you blend in the ambient light. So now there is an option to do this. So now you don't have to worry about your exposure sim going away just because you're using flash. Another thing that I thought was interesting is that on this camera, it does not have the option to turn off the electronic first curtain. And there's been a lot of discussion on YouTube and other places about this. Some folks feel like it really, really affects the look of their bokeh. And it does affect the look of the bokeh just a bit whenever you have the electronic first curtain shutter turned on. And no, I'm not talking about the silent shooting, I'm talking about the electronic first curtain shutter. And that's something that has been an interesting topic. Now on this A1, you cannot turn the E shutter off, it's always on. And that's actually because the A1 does not have, it actually doesn't even have a mechanical second curtain. It only has one set of shutter curtains. So it's an interesting thing. That's actually what allows the camera to have a little bit more durable mechanical shutter than what we've seen in the past. And it also allows the camera, well, it actually just makes the camera have a little bit of a different sound. So yeah, you guys hear that. The shutter is very different sounding. You guys probably heard me commenting on that in the first A1 video I released. Now I'm going to do some testing and see how this affects bokeh. You know, not being able to turn the electronic shutter off, or the electronic first curtain shutter off, I should say. According to Sony, we shouldn't see as much of an effect on bokeh as we did in the past, but I'm going to have to test this out, guys, and find out. Another thing I thought was interesting is that we now don't get this really, really annoying thing happen whenever we zoom in to our images in playback mode. So one thing that I really like doing is when I'm shooting, I like to you know, zoom in and check the model's makeup or check focus, things like that. And so oftentimes for me, I find myself shooting a lot of images in the vertical orientation, And I like to have the camera automatically flip the image for me as I turn the camera in playback. But if you're doing this on older Sony cameras and you have your image turned vertical on the display, whenever you turn your camera vertical, if you zoom in, your image doesn't stay vertical. Your image actually does this weird thing where it goes back to being horizontal and it zooms in. So I've always thought that was a weird thing. It annoyed me. Again, cameras as recent as the A9 II and A7R4 do this. On the A1, it does not do that anymore. So that's something nice. Whenever you have that image displayed in a vertical orientation after having turned the camera vertical, if you zoom in, imagine that, the image actually stays vertical. Another thing I've noticed is that if you're shooting in cropped mode, the camera's maximum flash sync speed actually jumps up to 1/500th of a second as opposed to 1/400th, which is pretty cool. I suspect this happens because the camera is not having to scan as much of the surface area of the sensor, so it's able to make a little bit faster scan since you're in crop mode, and then your flash sync speed increases. So kind of interesting. Let's see, what else have I noticed? The other thing that's really cool that is not that big of a deal for me, it wasn't as big of a deal on the older bodies, but it is nice to see it improved. The newer processing in the camera means that if you're shooting and you do something like, say you shoot a burst of images and they're writing to the card, you can actually still access things like your function menu, and you also can go into crop mode. So this is something that for a lot of people could be very, very annoying, especially if you're shooting sports or wildlife. You go and you take a burst of images and everything is kind of still processing, and then you want to go into crop mode to maybe get a little bit closer shot of that bird at a distance or that subject at a distance, and you can't do it because the camera has to finish writing first. So now you don't have to wait on that process. You can go ahead and go into crop mode, and the camera doesn't just sort of like bottleneck itself, which is really cool. What else? Oh yes, another thing that I noticed, and this is something that I don't find myself doing too much, but a lot of times when people ask me about images, if they're having focus troubles, a lot of times I like to go in and display the focus point and actually see where they focus in their image. And this is something that we haven't really had the ability to do on Sony cameras. This is something I constantly do on other camera brands like Nikon and Canon. Someone says, Jeremy, I have all these pictures that are out of focus. I go into their camera and I turn on the focus point display and I can immediately see where they were focusing. But on the A1, there is an option now to be able to do that. And this is a nice addition because it's obvious that the cameras have always known where you focused, because if you've ever noticed, even on the previous Sony models, if you focused on a particular spot of a scene and you shot an image, whenever you go into playback and zoom in, the camera always zooms in to the point where you were focused first. So it clearly knew where you focused. So now it's actually nice that it can actually share that information with the user. Anyways, guys, I'm sure there'll be lots of other things I'll notice. If you guys have A1 questions, write me in the comments below. I would be very, very curious to see your thoughts. And out of all these different tips and little things I've discovered, tell me, guys, which one do you think is the most interesting and the most beneficial? Also, if there's anything that you've noticed about these newer cameras, write me in the comments below. I'd like to know what you guys have found. Don't forget to subscribe, and there will definitely be more videos coming in the future. You can also follow my work. I am known as PhotogJTheGreat on all popular social media. Anyways, guys, until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, signing off.